Good morning, everybody. We are here once again at Dmexco 2015. We're on the M&M Global filming studio, and we're about to do something we've never done before. We are about to create a global programmatic ecosystem from the brand to the publisher. To help us achieve that, we have a good trusted friend in the easel and some pens, so we'll be doing a lot of sketches. We also have a fantastic panel to help us find out just exactly how that programmatic ecosystem works and flows. So to do that, we have Arun Kumar, who is the global president of Cadreon. We have Dave Reed, who is the managing director of MediaMath EMEA, and we have Alex Brownsell, who is the editor of M&M Global, and joining us in a moment will be Jay Stevens, the international manager for Rubicon. But what we're going to do, we'll set a few rules, guys. I think what we want to do is we want to produce something that's very much content-led and not necessarily a lunarscape, which is a host of logos in different boxes. We want something to be a bit more meaningful and a bit more knowledgeable, that gives people a real insight into how programmatic works and what are those companies doing within those boxes. The one rule I think we're going to try and stick to is if a company where 50% or more of their business is, that's the box they will slip in. So someone may say I'm an SSP, I'm a DMP, but actually what 50% of their core business is, that's how we'll define them in the box. We have a kind of chart, if you like, that we've kind of sketched at the moment, but we want to make that slightly more in depth. So we'll talk about as many of the companies we feel should fit into the boxes. If there's any boxes we are missing, we can add companies into. And then I suppose most importantly is the type of information we want to include on each of the companies. But I will hand over to Alex to take proceedings from here. Please feel free to jump up and draw on the chart, or tell us off if we've got the wrong things. But without further ado, here's Alex.
Thank you very much, thank you. So I think we probably need to set out, I guess, the absolute basics of what we're trying to achieve, which is how is programmatic media bought and sold across the entire ecosystem. And in terms of, from an initial design perspective, I mean, would you say that it is helpful to kind of almost not top to bottom or left to right to start, advertiser to kind of publisher and therefore consumer, or is that a little bit simplistic? What do you think?
Makes sense to me. I think that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we got that one sorted then. So the first stage then, I guess, are we?
Oh, we'll draw up.
Yeah. So the first stage, are we kind of thinking if we're going to start from advertiser and work our way across? Do we go into? Do you think just straight into trading desks, or is it worthwhile having an almost agency kind of layer in there first, or is that probably the trading desk is the most relevant element to start off with?
I would say that the trading desk is the most relevant one.
Yep.
The only thing you might want to add is that there are a lot of brands which have in-house solutions, which probably about 2 to 3 years ago was not relevant, but now it is.
Yeah.
So either they're brand-led agency involved, as they call it, or they're pure in-house desks, so you'll have to include that. So it's not just an agency trading desk. I would just say it as what is the buying platform, and include all of them in it.
The buying platform. Okay.
So I'd also throw out a change going on in a lot of agencies is that the trading desk, as it was previously constituted, is getting folded in increasingly with the media agency, the operating agency, right? So AOD no longer exists as a thing. It's pushed into ViviKey. WB has a number of initiatives that are sort of Xaxis-like, but use Xaxis in a more open way. You kind of look across Aegis Amnet, Havas, everyone's sort of compressing that a little bit. So I think maybe a further extension, even to Arun's point, there are some brands that have gone all the way to the technology, but even internally within the agencies, the technology seems to be getting closer to the client conversation, which I think is a positive thing overall.
When we first started doing our marketplace summits around the world, what we saw was that every major agency holding company had their distinct trading desk. And it was very efficient for us because it essentially allowed us to talk to 6 trading desks in any given market, and that would be able to facilitate the spend through those desks and onto the publishers and media owners that were on our platform. That's changed significantly. In fact, our last marketplace summit that we had in the UK, which was twice the size of what it was last year, we held it 2 weeks ago. I think we had 35 media owners and 19 agencies and trading desks. So we're seeing definitely a trend where the trading desk itself is beginning to dissolve, and that center of excellence is beginning to permeate directly into the agencies. And I do believe that's going to be something we're going to see much more of in the future. Largely is because if you think about what does the future of media buying look like, it's going to be a single console that is going to be able to allow a planner buyer, a sophisticated, analytically driven planner buyer, to buy any medium wherever they want against the target audiences that they want to hit. Now, is this a 5-year or a 10-year cycle? Who knows? It never happens as fast as you'd think. But ultimately, that's what the vision of where things are going, especially if you think of things like out of home, where only single-digit percentages of their impressions are digitized, but upwards of 30% of out-of-home's revenue, or out-of-home companies' revenue, are coming from the digital displays because they can generate much more productivity out of each screen. So, as TV becomes addressable, as radio becomes IP-based and leveraging people like Spotify and Deezer and others, that's going to have it's going to really change the way in which media is planned and bought. And once that common console is in place, common currency for how data and audiences are treated, that will certainly be the future. And whether that sits within the brand or it sits within agency traders. Who knows where that's gonna rest, but ultimately somebody's got to turn the dials and pull the levers to make that campaign perform.
Okay. Should we start with the brands at the top? Are we happy to start that?
I think so.
Are we going to list all of them?
No. No, this will just be, so if we start, that's the kind of start of our journey. We're happy as that as the first stop. And then do we want to talk about how many brands do we, I suppose it's infinite, isn't it, in terms of the number of brands that have gone in-house. Where should we kind of go, I suppose, next? Should we go to trading desks? How do you think?
Well, I would say that you need to almost separate out in the agency space two different types of companies.
Okay.
There are the agency operations, which are like what Viveki's done, so there's Starcom and Zenith. And then there are pure play ad tech companies like Xaxis and Cadreon.
Yeah.
And you should separate the two out because the two of them play very different roles.
Okay.
And also it helps highlight to anybody who reads the chart as to where each agency group stands with respect to programmatic. They're two very different philosophies. I have a very strong opinion on it, but then others do as well. And I think that it'll be illustrative to separate the two.
Okay, so if we try and focus on, I guess, our aim is to try and take a look at the majority of international media in programmatic. Obviously we can't fit everybody in that's working in all the different regions, smaller players. But if we talk about the big guys, if we're talking about where 80% say of the market is, should we list out some of those trading desks that we think ought to be included? So, Cadreon naturally.
I mean, you look at the 6 big ad holding groups and you'll find all the names there anyway. You will find, in some cases, like in the case of WPP, you'll find Xaxis. You'll also find other operations that have been created for clients. And then in the case of Publicis, you've got Starcom, and so similarly, if you just go through each of the ad holding companies, you'll get the brands.
So I'll say, maybe tagging on to what Arun's saying, almost to me the interesting bit here is that break is an interesting conversation because exactly like Arun's saying, there may be at least 2 models. I think within that is the underlying business model. So is it fundamentally a performance media, you don't see how the sausage is made, or is it fundamentally hey, we're going to hold your hand and help you understand programmatic because you want to understand programmatic? Both have value, and I think there's an interesting play there because as you go downstream, I think it has effects, right?
Yes.
When we get to the SSP exchange layer in a closed model, right, whether it's third party or within a holding company, those deals could even be direct and it's still considered quote-unquote programmatic because they've done some automation. There's very little transparency, whereas I think in the more disclosed model, there's a sort of effect.
The only caution that I would put to that is that there are operations in the trading desk space that are more transparent than actually what's taking place in the agency space. Right. So the business models have evolved and they're actually very client-driven. So I would say that the reason why you separate them out is that in the agency case, they are completely reliant on the external technology ecosystem. They don't have any of their own. All that they're working on is they're saying, I'll provide a set of people who are going to manage a set of technologies. And in a large amount of cases, that's very managed service driven, whereas what the ad tech companies do, like a Zaxxas or a Cadreon or an Acuin do, is that they actually very actively manage that ecosystem. I think about a year, maybe even a year and a half ago, you could say that there's a very clear divide. This is completely non-transparent, this is transparent. You could try and make those kind of assumptions. I don't think it's true anymore.
So we'd have two streets. So one.
So I would actually have multiple, right? It's media agency, right? Because some of the budgets flow directly. It's trading desk. It's internal
client-led, in-house.
Okay.
So trading desks.
Perhaps client-led in-house can almost be like a kind of separate.
Okay, so out here.
Stream.
So client-led.
In terms of, so obviously we know in terms of the big six agencies, in terms of trading desks, so do you think the independents still have a role to play? I mean, impartially off the record.
So the exchange labs, those kind of, would we fit them in here?
I would almost remove that word trading desks and just make them, call them ad tech specialists, because because that space is blurred so much. I don't think you can strictly. I would love the independents to be pushed in there as well, because you can't create a separate grouping. If the only thing that differentiates them from some of these companies is they're not part of a holding company, that should not be a reason to differentiate them. Ownership should not be a reason why you create a separate layer.
Yeah, I think that's right. And because if you open it up that way, there's I would say even a new class of publisher, which may look like an e-commerce platform, like an Amazon, an eBay, a Rakuten, Baidu. Like, those guys here in Europe, there's a ton of movement. Tesco acquired Sociomantic. Zalando just bought Matrigo. So there's a lot of those brands coming in and creating advertiser solutions. They look like advertisers or retailers, but actually they're providing advertiser solutions back. Auto Group did a similar thing here in Germany recently as well.
Okay.
So do we also then from here, if you didn't go here and you went into a stack, you touched on it briefly there, that if you were going into the stacks like a Google or an Adobe, is that something else that would come off of brands at the start, or would that be
IBM, Oracle?
So I'm almost tempted to say that if you look at the original Lumascapes, right, they were a flow. Yes. They went from they followed where the dollar went. But if you were to step back and say, forget about where the dollar goes, but look at it in terms of what this has enabled. If the assumption that this has enabled a data-driven marketing ecosystem is true, then I would put the DMPs or the data platforms at the center, and then I would figure out who plugs into it and in what shape, and what are the outcomes that result out of it. So if you look at it, in the past, it was the buying platforms that had the power. Yes. Now it's the buying platforms that have data on top of it, or the pure play DMPs. So the whole data space itself becomes so complicated that if you started sketching that at the center, you will have 3 boxes within that. Right. And then surround that with the buyers on one side, the sellers on the other side. Then there is demand and supply. That, to me, is the ecosystem that you should be looking at.
And I agree with that, but I define DMP or not use that word at all. It's the data holder, where that could be more traditional CRM players like Epsilon, Axiom, experience in this space. I think the next wave of this will be about leveraging third-party data is great. A lot of it's going to be leveraging first-party data too, and I think those players will be critical.
Yeah, I mean, data is absolutely the bedrock of what programmatic trading is all about. Whether it is publishers and media owners leveraging the data that they have on the users who are on their sites, whether it's subscription data or it's behavioral data, or any kind of registration data that they bring to the equation, that helps them raise the overall value of their inventory packages, because they're bundling certain audience segments and creating audience segments based on that data. Alternately, on the buy side, everything that is being done based upon known data points about those consumers. Largely, have they visited a website? Where are they in the purchase funnel? And trying to either retarget those users or push them towards some kind of desired action, whether it's through awareness at the top end, through down to conversion, and then actually CRM data begins to play a big role in reactivation, cross-sell, upsell, and trying to ensure that those consumers don't go fallow and attrit.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of if almost data sits here, right in the middle somehow, and we kind of work around it. I don't know. Is that kind of visually how you think?
Yes, I would put that in the center.
Okay.
So if we have data here,
And I would say that you would then have those different classifications within that.
Yeah.
What are platforms? What are third-party companies? What are
so these
etc.
these then come off of here.
And then you will have probably buying on. You could either put it on top and put the outcomes bottom, or you could do it left to right. Either way, it works.
Oh, so kind of buying or selling here, or okay. So that makes sense. So we would have our brands here still, then our data, and then these.
You would have the tree exactly the way it is. It's just that you have to find the ways by which the media agencies or the programmatic specialists or the client-led in-house plug into data.
Okay.
And what are all the other entities that plug into that? All that data soup.
Yep.
And what comes out of it. So what are the outcomes, and what are the how do the buying platforms play a role? And what you will find interestingly there is that there's a lot of overlap between them. You will find the buying platforms also being a part of the data soup because they're building those capabilities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're still on the buy side for now, and we kind of look at the demand side platforms, would we put them in here perhaps before we kind of get to data, or how do you think that?
Well, they're plugged. So maybe if we did buy here for now and sell in here, then would we have this side plugging into there?
So data enables the decisions that you're going to take. So you're buying the platforms per se, which are pure play DSPs and which are not, are going to come after and before in both ways. So what happens is it's a loop. If you look at first party data, that comes first and then you activate it through channels. But at the same time, what's happening through the channels goes back in there.
Right.
So it's a loop
So
that way. But so you will have to start with data, because as Dave made the point, it will increasingly be about first party.
Yes.
And so that will happen even before you've spent the first dollar on media.
I think that's an interesting point, because if you have that sort of virtuous loop of, and I think it's one of the values of this automated way of buying media, that you would have that sort of rinse repeat cycle of learning, extending. I think then actually, and we don't have to go into this, but I think it makes the value programmatic beyond just getting a banner ad or a video on site. You begin saying, well, how can I append this, because I've joined all the data in one place? How can I append media consumption data of frequent purchasers to my email model or to my direct mail model, or how can I use it to inform other things? So I think, again, we don't have to go into that because it's sort of expansive, but then what we're seeing is a real rise in the use and integration of data out of that media execution by non-obvious players, by clients of ours that might use traditional consultancies, for example. They might be related to totally different aspects of the business than what's traditionally considered digital media. So I think that's kind of exciting too.
Yeah.
So how would we visualize that? If you were to visualize that in a chart, what would we have plugging into here first? Then would we have the DMPs coming into here?
I think it's two-way, right? It's a double-ended line.
Okay.
That would be the easiest.
Yeah.
So kind of like,
I guess
like
every
this.
line's double-ended. But
Yes. I'm trying to think of the
double
best
arrow.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think of the best way to. So would we have then in that case? What would we have here, Alex? The DMPs here from the buy side coming in, or
are they inside this?
are they
I
in
think
here?
that's it.
They're inside that, but like we were saying, you would differentiate that. You would say platforms, you would say data providers,
Yeah.
and maybe other
Traditional CRM providers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So your platforms.
I'd also say more and more we're seeing it could include things like point of sale data.
Yep.
So you could do that for attribution. So drive offline,
Yep.
Results from an online media execution.
Yeah. Okay. So then into demand side technology. One of the interesting things I think when we were researching this is that obviously perhaps where that was once very well defined, if you were a demand side platform or supply side platform, the boundaries are blurred. I think our ambition is to probably have where 50% or more of a business's revenues come from it is demand side or sales side. To sort of separate it out, but it's tough.
So good luck getting those numbers from anybody.
Yeah.
I understand the urge. I would almost say as important as anything is an understanding of the underlying business model, because I think that's the bright line, right?
Okay.
So if you say, I'm only going to represent demand side, I'm only going to represent supply side, that has a set of assumptions and about underlying business and how you make money. I think if you say, look, we think we can do both, that represents something else. With my MediaMath hat on, we have a strong view that there's a bright line there, that you can't do both without some degree of unless you're really, really uber transparent. But I think that's interesting. I'd also say I would classify out on that business model point. So you have people who represent both sides. You have people who represent only one side. There's a third group, which is completely intransparent, and I would call that sort of first wave of, I'll use air quotes, programmatic, which really just looks like a network part two, right? I think, those models are out there as well. There are a number of logos you could put under that sort of heading too.
Okay, so network phase two.
I don't think you'll get to a point where you can just take one person and say you're in demand, because 52% of your revenue came from there and the rest came from the sell side, so you can't be. You're going to have these logos in multiple places, and you're going to find that blurring taking place increasingly.
It does seem to be. I think it was one of the issues that we had when we were first drawing it up was we would, if someone historically was referred to as DSP or an SSP, we'd kind of put people in those boxes, but actually that was probably the area that we encountered the most resistance, or we had the most challenges around, really. It's like, actually we kind of operate on both sides of the spectrum.
So I agree with Arun. It is difficult to say definitively. I mean, we feel like we're 100% demand, but we talk a lot to publishers. It's often with our SSP and exchange partners. So there is a little bit of, you need both. Again, I'd go back to the business model. Are you primarily making money by delivering results, but taking undisclosed margin on it? Are you delivering results by being fully transparent? I think that's an important. Are you delivering results because it's tied in as a value add, right? When you get to really big FMCG, digital budgets are this teeny little part on it that are often thrown in, as part of something else. So I think as you look at it, the way people make money almost would be the separator of how you might think about it. A platform versus a sort of point solution that's delivering, some form of media on a guaranteed basis.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a way of almost like using, like almost sort of shading visually, that you had kind of technology companies, and you kind of shading towards, I don't know, one colour for primarily, or buy side, and then you kind of transfer through to a kind of a lighter shade that is more on the sell side, and you kind of have the publishers plugging into those guys and advertisers plugging in on something.
No, I think that makes sense.
The other thing is, who do you expect to use this ecosystem chart?
I think we visualize it as people who are relatively coming fresh to this ecosystem.
But I also think more experienced buyers as well, who want to see a flavour of who runs what, if you see, and who's where and where they are. And
so the reason I'm asking you that question is because if your objective is for people who do not have such a good idea about programmatic to read this chart, the simpler you make it, the easier it is for them. Because the more you're going to try and get into the complicated nuances of it, the more you're going to lose people. On the other hand, if the objective is that you're going to do this for the specialists, then yes, you have to get into detail. So I think that you'll have to strike that balance and not make that so huge and so incomprehensible. Like a brand marketer looks at it and says, I can't make head or tail of this.
Exactly. So I think you're right. We want somewhere in the middle between the two grounds.
So if I were doing it, then I wouldn't make it look like this. I'd make it start with the consumer, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about the consumer, it's a set of data that are known, some anonymous, some not anonymous, right? And then you'd go to how does that data get collected? You have the data layer, maybe do it that way, because from a brand perspective, that's what I would think they would care
We've
about.
come prepared with many sheets of paper.
Don't worry. So if we
Lots of drafts.
started then with a consumer
Why don't we put them in the middle?
in the middle, yeah?
Oh, okay.
Yeah?
It's symbolic.
Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. Consumer. Here we go. Okay.
And so then you have. How would you have it? So obviously, advertisers are trying to reach consumers. Consumers are consuming media.
We're not just again, it almost looks like concentric rings in my mind on the data piece, where you start off, they purchase things, right? There's a whole set of data that comes out of that. They consume content. There's sets of data that come out of that. They belong to loyalty card programs. They go to stores regularly. Like all of those sort of things create this data cloud. Some of which are first-party source, some of which are third-party source. I think as you go sort of next stage from that, there are a set of analytics that are drawn out of that drive things like media planning. Hey, we got a Nielsen rating over here. That's one of those data points, right? We reached this many, this was the GRP we reached against young moms. All of those sort of fit in that sort of data layer. And then, because I like how Arun's thinking about that data part, which surrounds the consumer, really is the thing that drives everything.
I mean, everybody is leveraging the data assets that they have, whether to find those unique audiences that they're after, if they're an advertiser, or leveraging or the publisher doing a better job of identifying the audiences that they have within their portfolio. So, and actually, this kind of touches on a big trend that we've seen in the last, I would say, couple of years begin to accelerate. 3 years ago, this week, or last week rather, we launched with Laplace Media, which was the first major national cooperative of premium publishers who came together to share reach and scale, but most importantly to leverage the data assets that each of them brought to the table to really create a holistic view of the audiences that they have within the entire portfolio of publisher sites. So historically competing companies, people like Groupon Marie and Figaro Media, who would compete for the same budget, kind of realized that we needed to band together in order to put up a decent fight against the likes of Google and Facebook. And so that trend that we saw 3 years ago has accelerated. 2 years ago, two more national cooperatives launched. One was the Czech and the Greek, or the Czechs and the Danes both came on and built their own co-ops, doing exactly the same kind of structure. And since then, the Italians and now most recently, and the Greeks as well, within the last year, and then most recently the Hungarians and the Argentinians. So this is becoming a pretty global trend that we're seeing taking place.
Well, so in a way, actually, we had data in the middle. I mean, ultimately, the data is about these guys, isn't it? And
It's the same, yeah.
So it's kind of one and the same. And we could maybe explain perhaps what we know about the consumer through those various platforms we were talking about previously, and whether it's first party or third party. Okay. By the way, if you guys want to get up and draw, please do.
My longhand is very poor after many years of shorthand as a journalist. So if we had the data on the consumer here, would we still use our three defining angles of where we come from?
Yes, you would.
So would you guys be cool to have it kind of, if you had that, and you had media agencies here? I like the idea of programmatic specialists as opposed to trading desks.
Programmatic or ad tech, what would you prefer?
Well, because you're calling this the programmatic ecosystem and you are focused on that, in my mind, actually, your challenge is going to be that this whole ecosystem and the Lumascape when it first came out was relevant to just programmatic.
Yeah.
But now actually it impacts all marketing.
Yeah. No, of
For
course.
example, you've got advanced TV in the US, where a lot of these data sets get applied to TV. You've got out of home, which is going programmatic in a lot of countries in different shapes and forms.
Yeah.
You've got audio that's going programmatic. And so you've got all these different versions. In my mind, this is much more than just programmatic. Programmatic is a significant component of it, but actually that central data set, it needs to drive all, at the very least, it drives all your digital buying. So that I think there's a difference between technology and data and the trading. And people get fascinated with the method of trading. So whether I participate in an auction or whether I do a direct deal, how am I taking those decisions? How am I being informed? And in a lot of cases now, the programmatic ecosystem, or so-called programmatic ecosystem, enables me to make smarter decisions even about buys which are not in the exchange or auction space. Right? So I would almost go into what's the entire ad tech space look like today. Because the other components that you have to it are things like viewability, fraud. They go well beyond programmatic. They also impact other publishers. It's not just a programmatic problem.
Absolutely.
Viewability is a problem across. You've then got mobile, you've then got tablet, you've got viewability standards across them, you've got fraud, which again cuts across the entire ecosystem. You need to capture all of that in here. So I would almost not call it a programmatic ecosystem, call it the complete ad tech ecosystem. Or alternatively, you sort of break that up into multiple charts and say, here's a consumer-centric view of what happens. Here is a buyer's view of what happens, which is the previous chart. And the third chart is if you were to aggregate this and look at it as all ad tech and not just programmatic, here's how it looks like. So you go in really deep and then you start to pull out. I don't think you're going to be able to create one chart that's going to capture all these nuances.
I agree. No, I agree.
It's almost like a multi-dimensional thing that you'll have to see to show all those interrelationships. People can easily get lost.
Absolutely. Which is quite exciting for us, I think, because that gives us the opportunity to almost have, you're right, 3 parts to the chart. I'm thinking this would be as much of an probably the most important one to start, wouldn't it? Is the consumer and the data one, do we think?
Yes, I think so. I mean, that I think is increasingly the most important part.
So if we have these 3 streams coming into here, are we then, where are we putting our, are we going to include stacks in here? Do we include SSPs? Where do we go? What's our next stage, if that makes sense? What else comes into here? Obviously these guys then extrapolate.
So I'm guessing brands are kind of up here, right? And they're kind of feeding into these guys.
I would almost say that you've got those 3 at the top.
Yes.
And you've got consumer data right at the bottom in this case, because you've got a number of intermediaries. Then that data is being captured through different sources, which will be that.
So this becomes the bottom.
Yes, because if you represent it in this linear fashion, then it has to be at the bottom, because the way those agencies, those specialists and the in-house desks are accessing it is through various other platforms. So your entire ecosystem comes in between.
Why don't we go back to the other one, because we sort of decided that that could be consumer data.
Yep.
It seems like we're closer on this.
So almost this way.
Right.
And then these guys are coming, and then in between we've got, so here we've got, and here. So here we would have the intermediate before we get to the data. So how would we?
I would say those directly plug into that.
Yeah.
These directly plug into that, yeah.
Yes. And then post that is where you get, multiple channels and multiple buying platforms.
Fine.
Right? So you've got TV, video, social, display, mobile.
Yes.
All of that comes below that. And then within that you have those specialists. There are guys who are purely platform. There are guys who are inventory. There are guys who are mixed. They're all in.
Got you. So if we came out here and it was mobile, we say. Video.
So you put all those channels in there, exactly what Arun said. I think
So
then if you wanted to put a layer that said, hey, some kind of measurement and verification, that would take care of the fraud. It would be Nielsen on TV, it would be Nielsen online, it would be ComScore, it would be all those players, as well as fraud, as well as
I would almost put
viewability.
channels, measurement.
Yeah,
so channels here.
yeah, all your channels,
Okay, so what have we got? Mobile, video, TV. Would we put it in
social,
Yes, social,
TV,
display, video.
there? Display.
out
Okay.
of home, programmatic print, blah
And
blah
then
blah,
there's audio.
audio.
Okay,
And then you've got measurement.
and then measurement
Would be-
coming out of here.
I think that cuts across the buy and sell side
Yes.
too, right? Yeah.
So kind of banging if we put this in the
So
I
middle.
think
I
it's
would almost
separate.
not call it buy and sell. I would just remove the buy and sell words completely.
Okay.
These would be your channels. Then
These are our
there'll be measurement.
So
And I think
another-
the third one would be analytics, because there
Yeah.
are companies that are doing analytics
so
on it.
coming out of here measurement.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, they're
Ooh,
just,
out of
you
the
can put it any
channels,
which
yeah,
way.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
can put it any which way. You
Oh.
can put the channels below, you can put measurement on the side.
Got you.
Doesn't really
Okay.
matter.
But it's not related to the consumer data, it's related to those media channels,
So
right?
the media
yeah, yeah.
channels, yes. So measurement and analytics, would we put that separately?
Well, I don't know whether you can include measurement and analytics as one.
Yeah, it's kind of one and the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because under each of those channels, then you'll have to break that up by data. You have to break that up by platforms,
Yes.
inventory, because there and guys who are probably in both.
Okay. So so if we
That
so
will be in each one of those: mobile, video,
got
TV.
you. So we would then break these out if they went into.
So yeah, and before we break it out, I think this is the big decision point: is for the media channels. My proposition would be, I think business model of the way you're accessing those is how I would personally break it out. Are they representing the demand side? Are they representing the demand and supply side? Are they actually a media owner, right?
Yes.
So there are a number of companies out there that look like tech platforms but actually own their own inventory, and
Yes.
so I think that sort of breakout might be.
If you can get that information, that's great.
Yes, I was about to say.
exactly.
I mean, that's the other. So
Well, look, I think you can get the information, again, if you make your money in a transparent way that fully discloses exactly what's happening in between, that means you're representing the demand side, I would say. If you make your money by either taking ownership of inventory or controlling inventory on the other side, I think that's a fundamentally different thing, right? I think whether it's fully transparent or opaque is a really easy, bright line thing to call out.
So would we? So if we did another sheet of paper and we take all of these and then divide out who's underneath each one, that makes sense, doesn't it, to do it like that? Yeah.
Yes, I'm sure though that you won't be able to go through the entire logo soup.
Won't be able to get everyone.
You won't be able to get the entire logo soup.
No. This is
It's
true.
an interesting offline exercise.
Yes, but this is good for you too. No, this is this is where we pick your brains. This is the crux. So I actually really like this idea of we go into here, we have our data in here, and then how will we? What did we decide once we went into each of these channels? We were going to break them out again, weren't we? Into
Well, again, the platforms that you use to access them, that part is definitely bound up. So I don't think you could break it out mobile only versus mobile video TV or something like that. Again, my proposition would be, I think the big thing to me is whether you're primarily a platform, which is to say transparent and then used by the programmatic specialists and the media agencies, or whether your business, your role in life is to be a line item on a media plan, right?
Okay.
And in my mind, a programmatic platform for data, the media execution, whatever it is, your lot in life isn't to be a line item on a media plan, right? Like that is an old way of thinking about the world. The programmatic sort of revolution enables you to have a one-to-one conversation with consumers across all those channels. So it's less siloed, not more siloed. So again, thinking about business model, are you there to look like something that looked like the way media's been planned for 100 years?
I'd probably
or are you
say
breaking that
probably
up?
an easier way of looking at it is, are those guys behaving like ad networks where you just gave them an IO, so they are in the programmatic space, supposedly. So they may be buying inventory through different sources. They may either own it or they may go to the exchanges and buy it. But
Right.
actually, you don't get visibility into that. All you're doing is sending them an IO, and they are buying on your behalf, which is not really programmatic buying.
Right.
Right? Which is why a lot of the in-house, client-led in-house desks are actually doing that. They don't have the capacity to access the consoles directly. But if you look at it, there are a number of players who do not give you access to their consoles. They basically say, I will do the optimization, tell me what the objective is. There are some who operate in both spaces, but you can clearly make out that if you went at least in the top 10, 15 platforms, you will very clearly know whether they are in a self-serve mode or whether they are looking to make managed service. There are actually a number of players who would discourage you from managed service because they aren't built for it.
Yes.
Their model is that you use it and that you have complete visibility into what you're doing. Whereas some of the others have no desire to give you any visibility. They want to operate it themselves. You don't even know whether they have any tech.
Yeah.
They may just have a bunch of inventory.
Okay.
So I think that's spot on, and I'll say the one word that Arun used that I would call out is that transparency. So we have a number of clients who are trading desks within holding companies who will give access to our platform transparently to their end clients. It's not like the end client is ever going to go in and has any desire to operate. It's just they want to see, oh, this is what you're doing. I feel like I can grasp what's going on.
Yeah. So I suppose for us, and to show where we are, should we? I love the idea of measurement, which means we can then put in there the ad fraud companies, can't we? We can put in there the analytics side. So it's probably a good place for us is to kind of name as many as we possibly can that fit into these sections. And I suppose my other question is, where we put these companies in terms of what information do you think would be useful? Would it be useful to have? What we're trying to do is get away from the Lunarscape, where it's just
hold of, obviously.
where it's just names and brand and logos. Actually, let's give it a bit more depth, so you can actually get a real flavour of. It might be Tube Mogul has so many impressions or has this much inventory. That I suppose what we're trying to get is we want to show so people can see it in that, creating that right balance, so people get to see what companies are where, if that makes sense.
So I like the idea from before of color coding, and I think there's probably some, continuum to the point we're talking about where you look like just an IO on that you're doing on a media plan. That's one dark color, all the way to the other end where it's pure self-serve. You're really there to be a technology company, and you're primarily interested in system integration and things like that, and that's a very light color, something like that. And then sort of how that plays across there. I think the other one is whether you're actually the media owner or not, whether you make your money off of fundamentally your own inventory or inventory that you have some control over, or whether you're purely indifferent to the those would be the two axes that I would think you would locate those in.
Okay, so if we were to flip that over, I think I can remember all of that.
And I assume we're not going to try to go through and list all these names right now.
Well, it would be nice to have a few.
You guys are the journalists. You guys need to dig that out, my friends.
Of course.
This is very true.
So what I would say is that in terms of the information that you ask, I think what would be relevant for people is to say, XYZ company, what do you own?
Yeah.
What is yours? Is it, do you own technology? Yes.
Yes.
Do you have your own sources of data, which is not third party, but something which you're generating off? That's number 2. Number 3, do you own inventory? Or are you so when you ask those questions, you'll find some interesting answers.
Yeah. And then that dictates this spectrum, this continuum that we're talking about.
Because you will find that platforms which were thought to be pure demand side are not.
Okay.
Platforms that were thought to be pure supply side are not.
Yeah.
And what you will end up with is a mishmash, which is actually an accurate reflection of what the market is.
Yeah.
So would you guys would shy away then from how we did it in that initial chart where it's SSP, DSP, DMPs, and you would go down?
I think there's less mashup maybe than Arun perceives. Like, again, if you make your money off of, optimizing to advertiser outcomes, that's a clear thing. If you also make your money off of both, then that's a clear thing to me. And then if you're totally intransparent, I think that's another thing. And then I think if you're actually the owner of the media, now you could fall into multiple of those boxes, but you can, for the public companies, you can go read their public statements and the public filings and see where the margin comes from, right? So I think it's, for the private companies, it's a little harder, but I think the ownership question of, do you actually own a bunch of this inventory? Well, it's amazing that when I run on your DSP, your inventory seems to perform better. How did that happen than it does when other people? Like, that happens all the time, right? Well, there's preferences built in there, and those preferences indicate a monetization scheme that's different than full transparency. So
what you're going to find is, if you keep it as DSPs, SSPs, and whatever separately, you'll just find one logo popping up in 3 different places.
Yes.
So what that does is it means that if I'm reading through the chart and I don't have a lot of knowledge about these platforms, then I'm gonna read that through and say, okay, so you're a DSP. Okay, let me go through the SSP list. Okay, you're also you're not talking about the company in one place.
Yes. Yeah.
You're putting the company in multiple places, which is fine, but you're gonna have that overlap.
Yeah.
It's how if you keep it in one place and if you use that spectrum, then what it does is it makes it easier for someone to understand, okay, you're a little bit of this, but actually you're a lot of that. Whereas right now, if I put you on a DSP and SSP,
what does that mean?
That would then work if all you're putting is just logos.
Yeah.
All you're saying is ABCD is a DSP and it's also an SSP. That's it.
Yeah. And we actually want to go one step beyond that, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So almost you kind of have, sort of to nudge it slightly higher, data kind of consumer here, and we have the brands here, and we explain the method by which these guys are kind of interacting, and then almost below that we have these companies and kind of maybe the measurement over here, and we use that spectrum type colouring to,
and what you could do almost is that there are 4 or 5 platforms that are global that pretty much do most of those channels. You can almost call them super platforms and put them right up front, and then below that you can say, okay, now here are a few which are only mobile specialists.
Yeah.
Here are a few which are only video specialists.
But dwindling in number in terms of specialists, or
I like that a lot, and I would also say we're seeing growth of regional players, right? That may not have global reach, but for an individual country, they're perfectly
big.
fine, and they may have good penetration in a specific region or country.
well, lots of European ones, I guess.
Where would you put MediaMath besides the super platform?
Oh, that's a question.
It would be.
It would
to me,
be,
a super platform is something that gives you access to, let's say, 3 or 4 or more of those channels, right? And does so globally.
So could we pick your brains as to the other super platforms?
DBM
perhaps?
and AppNexus.
Who would be in there?
DBM and AppNexus.
AppNexus.
I would put Turn in there.
Turn as well.
Okay. Where would MediaMath sit if you were?
I think across channels, and on the data side, where the data side for us is we have a core set of capabilities that are really robust and full-featured. It's also partner, so partnering with CRM companies, partnering with the Oracles and IBMs of the world, because we see that layer. The data layer is fundamentally more interesting when it's based on first-party PII-based data. That's not the business we're in. So what we're looking to do is connect to that, connect to the email sort of management systems, the Marketos and Salesforces and Eloquas of the world, just naming a few. But there's a whole range of partners on that end that are extremely complementary to what we do in the online media side. We think we can handle all the online data management. I'll use air quotes because data management online comes down to some form set of analyses, which for more advanced clients is often in a more raw data form, but ability to query stuff at scale. And then on the other side of really sophisticated segmentation. I think those things are basically, you need those to be able to do it. And I'll actually say, I might take that box of the quote unquote DMPA out, because I think you can make an argument that certainly any of the global players in the media execution space each does data management. You kind of have to be able to track massive amounts of data and do segmentation and do all these sort of things.
Well, I just say there are different types of DMPs. There are DMPs that are very good at driving media effectiveness. There are site-side DMPs, which drive off of whatever transactions happen on a site. And then there are agnostic DMPs, and each one of them has their strengths and weaknesses. The agnostic DMPs are not so strongly connected to the buying platforms, but at the same time, they're very strongly connected to the marketing ecosystem. So I don't think that we can, so if you look at this and say all you're basing this on is media effectiveness, then yeah, I can use Stern as a DMP too, and it performs brilliantly. But that's not what a DMP is supposed to do. It's supposed to be the warehouse for everything, and increasingly the way clients are working with us, they expect a lot more than just media to get connected with it and to enable decisions. So again, I would almost differentiate and say that there are those three types.
Three types of DMP. So,
the one, I guess, difference I would say is I wouldn't call CRM DMP. It's CRM.
Fine,
all that
but
sort
I
of
think
deeper data is sort of there,
I
right?
think the ability for a platform, what the platform is structured to do is all I'm talking about. Whether the source is CRM or not is a different issue. You could argue that even a media-based DMP can ingest CRM data, but it's not structured for that.
No, I'm sure they are. I differ on that. I mean,
Well,
BlueKai can do it. We can do it.
I can tell you. Again, BlueKai does not come across as a media-only DMP. There's a difference between that, especially after Oracle have taken it over. So I'm talking from a pure user perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I have no alliances with any of them. I use all of them.
Yes.
But there are clear differentiations, and you are driven by use cases, and the use cases differ by clients. So when there are situations where we're working with different DMPs in different cases, financial clients have a certain preference because certain DMPs are very good at giving security. There are certain other clients who are just bothered about reducing overlaps between media and just driving effectiveness. They use a different type of DMP. So it's not about whether one is better than the other. You just have to look at what the use case is. And there are certain use cases that certain DMPs do better. It's the same as in buying platforms. No one buying platform ticks all the boxes.
yes.
There are weaknesses in many of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm conscious that we probably don't have that much time left, so I want to kind of pick your brains for the last few bits that maybe we haven't covered yet. So those, we kind of touched on them actually a little bit earlier, the kind of cloud sort of stack type layers, which sort of try and do a
Everything.
bit of everything. How would you represent those? You know,
So where does your Adobe's and your Google's fit, I suppose, the stacks? Are they super platforms? Are they?
DBM down there, so.
Well, so that's where I would say, rather than putting Google as a separate thing, there are elements within Google. Like you would take DBM and you would put it as a super platform. Adobe, you would put it as within the agnostic DMP set. And there are other products of Adobe which you might sprinkle around elsewhere. I think it'll get too complicated if you sort of created one on top which had a stack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because a stack has multiple components within it, which will have many of these like DBM, DCM, etc.
Yeah.
So the other component which we're missing somewhere, which we need to write, is ad servers. They still
Yep.
exist.
Okay.
So
Ad servers.
Do they exist? I mean, what do they exist sort of in between somewhere, or do we talk about them
probably
separately?
exist under measurement. I don't know.
Under measurement.
Measurement, tracking, analytics.
Yep.
If one component needs to be ad service because they're still the source of truth for a lot of campaigns.
Yeah.
And the three DMPs idea you had, it was agnostic.
Side and media. I mean, you don't have to follow these classifications. You can follow
No,
any.
No. It's good to get your thoughts.
It's great for us. It gives the team a couple of months to put it all into fruition and put it from. But we'd love to run it past you guys as well once we have it in a far greater and neater format than this. Yes,
right
no,
now.
no.
Is there
Sorry,
anything which you guys.
we've taken an hour, which is wonderful.
Yeah, no,
That's great. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And hopefully it's different. It's something to do very different,
It is.
and for us it gives a nice. You're right. We want to create that balance between the user who's never seen programmatic before, but then someone who's a seasoned programmatic and actually needs to look at how everything is working and how it all works together and where companies are placed, which I think is the key.
It may not look much now, but in a couple of months we'll we'll have got it all designed and it'll.
See you guys in 2 months then.
Exactly. Well, you'll see this in 2 months. Maybe not us. We'll be sleeping now.
Exactly. Fantastic. Thank you guys. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.